All right, might as well get started. So hi everybody, I am Todd Rossin, one of the two CEOs of IDMWORKS, one of the two founders as well of IDMWORKS. We're going to be talking about today something we call the best practices for assessment, blueprint, and road mapping. First thing I want to say about this is, let's be honest here guys, best practices are in like beauty, right? Eye of the beholder. My best practices may not be your best practices and so on and so forth, and that's perfectly fine. I'm hoping that we'll have at least a certain amount of content here that you'll hopefully agree with or like, or something that you feel free to incorporate in the future. The point really being that where we're coming from is about, well, you'll see it in a slide in a second, the shameless self-promotion slide, as I like to call it. We've been around about 14 years, and I'm going to bring that up now if I can figure this thing out. It should be fine. This is the quick one. I won't take too long here. So yeah, we've been around since 04, actually probably hovering around 135 employees. Why is this important? Not really all that important, other than that, they didn't just, pull me in off the street out there and say, hey, you got a subject you could speak on. When it comes to doing this process, this is one of the pieces within our organization that I have grown since its infancy, and it is near and dear to my heart. As far as who we are, full consulting organization in terms of advisory, but as well as implementations, full services across the board, from the program project management, design, engineering, etc., post-prod support, you name it. As well as custom development, including quite a few connectors for some of the hard-to-reach systems in terms of auto-provisioning, and then managed services and managed support services. So that's all the time I want to spend on that, because I know why this isn't why you're here, but I wanted to at least give you an idea of who we were, and from there, we'll get into the fun parts. Now, some of you folks actually may have seen this before. This isn't my first rodeo when it comes to this presentation. We try to adjust it as things have progressed within the industry. But what we want to first understand in our organization is, where are we from the maturity perspective, your old CMMI modeling, if you would. What you're going to see here is a typical five-phased, or I won't say five, but five-segmented set of maturities. Why this is important is, when we go to organizations, or when organizations, oh, I love when they get the cameras out. By the way, guys, I'll give you a copy of this at the end if you want. So I'm going to start that one real quick. I know this is a horrible tangent. Todd, T-O-D-D, at IDMWORKS.com. I will send you this thing out as well, because I'm the same. I'm always taking the pictures, and it annoys the tar out of me if I don't have the thing at the end. So I'll make sure you get it. So let's go back to this real quick again. A lot of the organizations, when they come into focus for running an assessment, blueprint, road mapping process, are typically within levels 1 and level 2. Things are ad hoc by nature, right? Your organization, group 1 here says, we need a single sign-on tool, so they went and they bought one. Not that we necessarily know where they are, and then group 2 needed one, so they go and they buy one. And then group 3 is now at the enterprise level, they're saying, well, we need a tool. They don't realize they got the other 2, and now they're looking at a whole other tool. Before you know, you got 3 tools that do the same thing, including year-over-year licensing, maintenance costs, etc. Well, this is rather problematic, right? So what we see in this is this type of piecemeal approach, where things are done from a tactical nature. It doesn't work long term, and we aren't looking at it from an enterprise perspective. Therefore, we end up with multiple products that do the same thing, and it costs a lot of money. And then the best is when these things go live, and if you're on the operations side, they go, hey, Todd, listen, we bought this tool. I know your skill set is, for your ops group, is on the Microsoft side. It runs in Linux, and it's live now. You guys need to take care of it. I love the laughs, because it means you've seen that before, right? Isn't that the worst thing ever? And then you want to murder people. And then they want to murder you because you push back or say, I got to go higher up to that, or you name the difficulty here. We got a first lever already. It's okay. I forgive you. So told you it was going to happen. Anywho, so along those lines, if that's where we are from an initial or developing perspective, We want to run a process that says, look, let's look at this thing holistically. Let's start with a governance approach, which I'm going to get into some of the details on. But the key piece of this here is to say, look, we need to do something a little more rational. We have to actually define what this problem is, take it, build actual requirements. You're going to see why, hopefully, and how, and I'm probably going to get a lot of nodding, but bad requirements are the worst thing that we can have. We want to be able to take this and say, okay, great, let's build out a structure, an enterprise architecture from that, something we all agree upon. We now can take that and run with it because we got a vision, we had an architecture. If we built out the PMO side of things, they know everything that they need to do. I'm going to go into a little more details on that, but basically being able to understand what are the constraints, dependencies, the tasks to get them from dev to test to prod, the resources required. What's this thing going to cost? How do we operationalize? How do we go post-prod support, et cetera? Well, in order to have that, we need to run something that is a little more effective in terms of a process. So once we've gotten to that structure, now we can run these year-over-year projects. And here's the key piece of it. If we've done our job well, we've got some metrics to go after. And this is going to all come back down to requirements, because here's the tricky part of the requirements. I've gone to some organizations and they say, auto provisioning, or let's say onboarding of new users needs to be quicker. And you go, oh, that's a hell of a requirement, isn't it? Because it's not a requirement, that's something I'd like to have. That's a problem. We need to be able to have something that's a little more rational, something that says, I don't know, right now, so onboarding needs to go from 4 weeks for a new user to 4 minutes or 4 hours, start to finish. Now, we don't need the start to finish language, of course, but that's an actual requirement with a metric that we can test against and see, you know what, did we get a bang for the buck? Because if we go buy the technology right now and we start there, good luck. We need to start with requirements. We need to start with process. We need to make sure that these things are where they need to be prior to buying any of the tech from any of the vendors you see at the show. Otherwise, you're going to have great shelfware, or you're going to put it in, and you know what's going to happen? Your crappy data and your lousy process is going to be really fast crappy data and lousy process, right? I've seen that in a few places. I'm sure you have too. There's nothing worse than having somebody go, oh, that's not what I wanted, right? Okay, so we want to run this. We want to build this out. We're going to get into a little more detail, but once we do this, now we can run against these targets, see if we're getting this thing done the way it should be, when, why, how, are we hitting our budgets, are we hitting our metrics, etc. Bless you, bless you. Okay, so on that note, now we're there. Well, everything's running great, right? What does that mean? Do we just sit back and say we're done? We, like the dealer, I'm out? Hopefully not. Because here's the trickiest part. As soon as we're optimized, what happens? The next thing comes along, or our data's stale. We didn't run governance. Perfect example, roles. We built this great role model. Everything's running great. Somebody comes in the organization. We give them a role. It's got, the magic 80-20 rule, 20-80 sometimes. Everything's running. Everybody's happy. 6 months later, everything's a one-off. We didn't govern this thing. We didn't care. We didn't feed it. We didn't continue it. And here's the other part about it. Even if we're happy hunky-dory with where we are, what's going to happen? Well, every 36 months, everything changes. Does anyone remember hearing much about blockchain 3 years ago? Yeah, me neither, right? Every 36 months, every 3 years, everything we know within IT security and I was going to say identity and access management, or we could just go IGA, because even the terminology changes will be different. And you can look at it. 3 years before that, everyone was just getting into really the cloud aspects of things. So now we're talking about 6 years back. You take another, or maybe not quite, 5. You take another 3 years from there, and everything was, gosh, I don't know. I think we were into heavy authorization. But every 3 years or so, you really see a market shift. And whether it sticks or not is a different thing. But that's why we never want to stick with this. We want to say, great, if I built a 3-year roadmap that I'm executing on, either at the end of year 2 or somewhere before that year 3, we need to run it again. And hopefully it goes quicker. And we're going to talk about what it takes to run it, because I got to speed this thing up. I forgot this is the short version. All right. So first, what are we assessing? Why are we assessing? Well, it's the old thing. We want to make sure the right people get the right thing at the right times for the right reasons, right? Here's the fun part, because then the auditor comes in and he wants to know you can do that. And he says to you, that's great, but how did you know it was Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the library? And you go, So hopefully, we've built in enough auditing in terms of this process, reporting, we can run it against metrics. You hear everybody talking about analytics and utilizing analytics. Well, hopefully we're moving towards that. So let's get to this now. So what are we assessing? We call this our jellyfish. And it's 3, but technically 4 components here. So under administration, you have the actual identities themselves, and these days that's human, non-human, and well, let's just say other. And then the entitlements around them. What can this thing do? What can that thing do? You know, mix and match, a little from column A, a little from column B. Then we get into the intelligence aspect of it, and that's where we said audit, analytics, logging, reporting, all those fun pieces. So administration and intelligence. So the management of those identities and entitlements and the intelligence. And then access is 2 core components. So that's why I said it's really 4. Auth-N and Auth-Z, right? I get in the door. Once I'm in the door, I've been authenticated. Now what can I do from an authorization standpoint? And that's sometimes the toughest thing to tackle. But this doesn't seem that difficult, does it? Right? Our friend the jellyfish. That's IAM in a nutshell. Till we turn the jellyfish on the side. And what do we know about a jellyfish when we turn it on the side? It's got all those cool little tendrils. So we do that, and bang. Holy cow. So the dashed lines to the white items are stuff that Forrester, Gartner, and a few of the other ones I think are a little more or less tertiary to IAM. Sometimes they're part, sometimes they're not. But we want to make sure at a minimum we're covering everything else that has some kind of color aspect to it. So now we're talking about, I always love this on the top and bottom end of it, but SIM, and you'll see some DLP in there. But then really the stuff that we typically will see in it, everything from segregation of duties, how we manage resources that may be for users, it could be customers, it could be non-humans, as a matter of fact. It can be Microsoft-based resources, as you'll see in there. It could be Linux, Unix, it could be hardware, software, it can be physical assets that are out there. It really just stretches the gamut. And then, of course, as we progress, so we're getting out of the provisioning aspects and the management of those, password management and the like, into Auth-N and Auth-Z. And again, now we have things like the authentication and the various frameworks there. You know, last couple of years, maybe 18 months, 2 years, there was this dramatic shift where now everybody's doing MFA or looking to build an MFA and has an MFA project, because everybody finally caught on to something. I remember, gosh, I don't know how many of these shows ago, maybe even it was Gartner, but I remember Ian, if you saw the keynote, speaking about, you know, the death of the password, et cetera. I know us as an organization went full MFA, multi-factor, right? As a matter of fact, even if you have my login name and my password, let's just say for argument's sake it was 8675309, you still can't get into my systems. You can't utilize it, and that's important. So we progress through this. We go from federation into, well, the various single sign-on models, whether it's cloud, enterprise, which is sort of like mainframe screen scraping, so on and so forth, into, again, the entitlements themselves, all the way into the access controls, when we're talking about things like role-based access control, attribute or policy-based access control, and the like. All these things we want to cover in terms of an assessment. Why? Because if it's within the banner of IAM or IGA, we want to make sure we cover it, even if it's a nice to have. So that gets us to the next step. All right, how do we do this? So this is my core slide. Hopefully this is where we get a couple of nodding heads. First things first, you have to sit down with your organization, and it can be top down, it can be bottom up. It can't just be the enterprise architects, because they're going to say, here are these 3 things that we want. The business itself may have a different idea of what they want. And then even the folks on the ground, look, the people putting in users in the HR system, or even the end users. That's when you find out, listen, I got 14 accounts and 17 passwords. And what's great is I got to change them. One's 6 months, one's 9 months, one's once every 2 years, and it's got different rules, and here's the problem. I have to change it, and I can't use the same one for 10 times, so here's what I do. The first one that pops up, I change it. I go 8675309 is now 8675308. And then I change it 10 more times until I get back to 8675309. These are the kind of things you're going to find out when you hit the ground running. You basically need to say to people, look, what makes you want to kill today, or people want to kill you? It's going to produce results. So you can't just use a piece of paper, because the wonderful thing about handing them all the questions ahead of time, or anyone these questions ahead of time, is good luck getting straight answers. Okay. Where does that go from there? Well, now we need to explain what that means to the organization. What does it mean from a technical standpoint, or even a non-technical. It can't just be, I've got 14 accounts and 17 passwords. What does it really mean? Is there a time loss? Is there a bunch of risks that come into play? They may be financial, like the time loss, or they may be security related, they may be operational related. We want to build out the risks. In other words, what's the cost of doing nothing? If we make no changes to this, what happens? Well, that's going to help us to be able to understand high, medium, low, as simple as that. What can we do? What should we do? And in what order? Now that we know that, we need to build out actual requirements to mitigate these. Because if not, how do we know we got anywhere? Build out a real requirement. Again, you remember the one I said from 4 weeks of onboarding to 4 minutes? Well, we can test that. Okay, that gets us to stage 2 of this, the blueprint. So look, you don't have enough time, you don't have enough people, you don't have enough money. And if you do, all power to you. We're never going to an organization that has had all 3 of these things. But we have to throw it out the window, these constraints, for a minute and say, look, based on these requirements, based on what we've learned, based on all those fun tendrils you saw from the jellyfish, what should this thing look like? So what we want to now do, build some true reference architectures, build it all in, everything. The auth Ns, the auth Zs, the provisioning, the privileged account management, i.e. the key to the kingdom accounts, all the cloud stuff and federation and all the fun stuff. Build some reference architecture, something to start. One of the biggest things we hear from the customer base out there is I don't understand the big picture. Now it's great if you're tactical still. If all I needed was a single sign-on solution for this one application, 2 applications, it's got to be true single sign-on. Great, that's tactical. But it's typically not that. And one of the biggest problems we see in the market is people being able to answer the holistic question. And that's where these reference architectures come in. What's it going to look like at the end of the day? Okay, where does that go from there? Well, now we can do a gap analysis. We know the issue, we know the current state and the problems associated, we know the future state. We know all the requirements, and this is before I fall off the stage here, but hopefully if we do this future state process, or technology or whatever it is, it's going to cover this requirement, that requirement, full traceability mapping. And that's how we're going to test if this thing actually worked at the end of the day. So it's just getting our ducks in a row. But this is huge. And if anyone here thinks this is solely an IAM thing, really you're in the wrong place. This applies to pretty much everything. Okay, now we want to talk roadmap. Now here's the fun part. Most organizations that go down this process will get you at least to a roadmap. Maybe they might struggle with a roadmap. And the problem I tend to find is they start and end at that roadmap. And that's the problem. So if you've ever had an organization come in and give you one of these things, or if you've built one and struggled with it, what ends up happening is you get this beautiful swim lane diagram. It takes all those different tendrils and it says, here's what you're going to do here, here, here. We're a big believer of trying not to have projects that run more than 6 months. Therefore, even if you got 3 years of auto provisioning because you got 17,000 applications to do, you do your prep work in a phase 0, a phase 1, get in the framework, we'll call it. What can I get into production? Maybe your HR system or whatever's doing your non-employee folks as well, into, say, an auto-prov tool, because I'm picking on auto-prov, down to everyone's got AD, we all got email, we probably all got some kind of service desk application, and then maybe it's 2, 3, 4 core applications we need to get in place. Okay, great. Then phase 2, the next 6 months, maybe everything that does auth N and auth Z against Active Directory. The next round, and so on and so forth. The point being that we want to build something rational in terms of this process, and that's great. But now comes the rub in all of it. A lot of organizations, even if they get down to this, if you've had somebody do it, or if you have some architects in the mix, they hand this, and it's call me if you need me. And then you, as the stakeholder, or heaven forbid you're also the PM on this thing, you go, wow, now what? Do I need to buy technology? Do I need to run an RFP? Do I need to understand what we just said about what we're going to do in that 6 months? What does that mean, dev to test to prod? What are the resources required to get this thing done? What are the deliverables? Test case, design document, architect document, communication plan, rollback plan, because we're getting rid of some legacy stuff we can't stand anymore, right? If we don't know all of this, we really haven't completed the puzzle. So that's the key. Is every one of these, we'll call them projects within this roadmap you build, needs to have this built out, even if it's high level. Dev to test to prod or whatever your format that you require is. And do I need 100% PM this round and next phase a 20%? And then if I understand my cost, can I budget this thing out? Now, hopefully we've got all the pieces of the puzzle. And as a matter of fact, since we've got all the pieces of the puzzle, now we can go down the tech route and say, great, auto provisioning, we picked on it. Now, who are the players out there that would fit this? And if I got to go RFP, now I should have all the information I need to do it. Ducks in a row. So that's why this piece of it, well, all of it, works. We've seen it work. And the fun part is, the orgs that haven't gone this approach, like I said, buy the technology, they pay the price. Bad data, crappy process, fast bad data, crappy process. All right, where does that get us? Well, we got our buddy, the plan, build, run approach. Plan, build, run, plan, build, run, plan, build, run. We talked about the planning aspect of it, hopefully in this, all these pieces that come out in the planning, then we actually go to the build process. And then, of course, once we get this thing operational, how are we going to feed it? How are we going to water it? How's it going to feed into the next iteration? Now, that's where governance comes into play, and we love to throw the word governance around. Everyone's like, governance, governance, governance. And you go, great, what does that mean? And they go, you know, they run out. Right? So that's the problem when it comes to governance, is asking them what that means. Now, you're going to see in here being able to have the proper support steering committee, your folks from an executive support perspective. But you know, where it gets kind of a little choppy is when it gets a little more technical. I used the example of roles before. And the fact that a lot of organizations, they'll put in this great role model and they'll run with it and they won't keep up with it. And here's what happens. Today I'm IT admin 3, it gets me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the entitlements are. 6 months later, the next guy who comes in, or girl who comes in to do this, they get the same thing and like 7 one-offs. And if we're not having some sort of a governance review board, as it were, to say, hey, we got 10 people in this month that all had one-offs, and the same one-off, we got ourselves a new role. That's the type of upkeep. If we're not doing proper governance throughout this, from that perspective, not just managerial-wise, not just from the steering committee and the executives, this thing will eventually break. Buy a new car and don't change the oil. See what happens. Right? Same idea. Speaking of which, and something I'm going to try to wrap up on here in a second, the other one I love to ask people, and you should keep in mind, is who here has been told, oh, we're about people, process, technology? Really, nobody has ever seen that? Oh, I see a couple of hands, right? Favorite thing to do, say, what do you mean by that? Remember we said governance, blank looks. It's the same thing because it's got to apply here. Look, the people. Give you an example. When we're building out these processes or getting an understanding of our process, if today the folks do it manually, and hey, I do A, then I do B, then I do C. Then I go down to N, and then I go back up to E, and then I go to asterisks, because that's something that I do. But the other guy might not do. Oh, and today's my last day. Good luck. That's a people problem there, right there. When it comes to this, it's not the only one, but this is a good example. Second, we talked about the process. Well, obviously that process is flawed right there. We have a process to fix. We're finding gaps. So the people in the process, and indicative of that too will be bad data when we talk about process, because if the data is bad, we got a whole other heap of problems. But now when we want to talk about the technology, the key is to say, well, if I understand what these issues are, some of them are going to be fixes that do not require technology. Technology should be here to either make it easier or faster or better. And if we don't take care of those first two, the people, the process side, your technology is going to fail every single time. So the last thing I want to hit you on here is how do we maintain momentum in this approach? You have to report, you have to communicate. I can't tell you the number of organizations we've seen out there that put in the coolest thing that nobody's ever heard about. And you'll hear that with some vendors too. We're the greatest thing that nobody's ever bought, nobody knows about. It's the same problem. You have to communicate. So from a project standpoint, well, you see it's a top-down, bottom-up approach, right? We have to actually show results. You don't show results, good luck to you, right? How are we doing that? Well, hopefully we're running against metrics that we can prove. We want to then show this from a project perspective. We want to report that up and then get to the program level. This is a quickie, right? Once we hit operations, how do we know that we're still doing the job? Well, again, we can metric it. If all of a sudden our 4-minute auto-prov or provisioning process is now 30 minutes, we got ourselves a problem here. The metrics show it. And then, of course, it has to be in a format that is consumable by management so that it can go all the way up the chain. I probably could have reversed these, but, and then it's going to go in reverse. You're going to hear from that upper management is going to say, well, based on this dashboard, hopefully you're not BSing it, pardon my language, we got us a problem and it needs to flow in the opposite direction. Or, hey, everything's great. What do you want to do next? Because I'm impressed, and here's a promotion. Why? Why not? You heard today the whole CISO thing, right? Who here remembers what CISO stands for? Career is soon over. That's why they're 2 years and out. Because here's the thing about this. This is giving your CISO, or if it's not CISO, it's one of the other roles, the bulletproof vest. Because what is a CISO at the end of the day? They're the Secret Service agent with the little wire in the ear, and they're protecting the president or CEO, et cetera. But if he doesn't have a bulletproof vest, what happens? He gets capped, he goes down. You got to give him the right armor. These are the processes to ensure that these things will be successful. And if you do this, you'll get there. Now, on the shameless self-promotion side again, we do this. You don't have to come to this. Hopefully you like what we had to say. If you reach out to me, you can have a copy of this, again, Todd at IDMWORKS.com. But also, if you got 30 minutes, either I'm available or we do it over a WebEx even, I could show you exactly what our stuff looks like at the end of the day. We're not misers. We're happy to share. We'll show you exactly when we do it, what does this thing look like, so that you get an idea. And if you want to run it yourself, you still run it yourself. And if you need help, we're more than happy to help as we do it. Because at the end of the day, too, ROI. This is the other one, hopefully to get you off on a laugh here at the end, right? Two different meanings. We know everything, return on investment, return on investment, return on investment. It's hard to quantify that, especially in terms of when we're talking about what would a fine cost me. It's a little difficult to quantify. For us, it's a little more about risk of incarceration, right? We sign off, there's criminal and civil penalties this day to attesting that what we have is true. We've protected data. Look at GDPR. It's all about that, right? We have to prove that we did what we said we were doing. Not just do it. We also have to prove it. And if not, there's a lot of penalties that come into play. Again, it's the alternate meaning to ROI. So guys, I'm actually done there. I'm not going to go the question route because I think we're butting up against time here, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll be in the back. One of my cohorts here, a couple of my cohorts here are going to come up and do the next session. If anybody wants to have a chat, can do it right outside the doors. I'm happy to give you a card or whatnot. Thank you.